The man in the black raincoat and his Labrador stood frozen on the path until we blinked. Then they reappeared ahead of us, blocking our escape. 26 years later, my wife saw the same pair vanish into thin air and still refuses to believe in ghosts when I was a 14-year-old lad attending secondary school at Erith in the county of Kent in southeast England, and finishes some 26 years later. It is not a long story, and I have made no attempt to sensationalize the events, as after all, that is not what serious study is all about, is it? Each morning, my younger brother and I, plus one of his friends, would catch the bus to school from our homes 2 miles away and alight at Erith Fire Station, 1 stop away from the school's main entrance. We younger kids were not permitted to enter the school via the main entrance due to a fatal accident involving a pupil and a lorry which had occurred 5 years previously. Instead, we had to walk down a path in Franks Park, a large wooded area which adjoined the rear of the school. The west side of the park consisted of woodland growing on 3 or 4 hills, quite high above sea level and affording some splendid views of the River Thames. To the immediate left was a glade, known locally as the Plateau, on which Belvedere House once stood. Owned by several affluent families over the past 200 years, it was, I believe, in its latter years purchased to house retired merchant seamen. The building was demolished in the 50s, and the new seaman's home, also now demolished and replaced by a housing estate, was erected on a site a couple of 100 yards away outside the park. The east side of the park was an open grassy area where children play and people walk their dogs. This was where you went if you wanted recreation. If you wanted peace and solitude, or simply wanted to cut school, then you went to the wooded area. Anyway, Franks Park was the gateway to our school. You turned right if you had lessons to attend, or straight into the woods if you had lessons to avoid. We would often take the latter option. One dusky autumn morning, the 3 of us were contemplating our next course of action once the bell had been rung and the register called, when we all noticed a man with a dog about 30 yards away. We were looking down on him from one of the hills and were a good 40 feet higher than him, I'd say. There was nothing unusual about people with dogs. We knew most of the regulars out for their early morning rambles. This man was different, however, and we all sensed this feeling of nonconformity. He wore a black knee-length raincoat, a black hat, possibly a trilby, I don't understand hats, and his dog, on a leash, was a black Labrador type. Certainly his attire seemed a little anachronistic, 1940s rather than 70s, but he and his dog were motionless and two-dimensional, rather like a cardboard cutout. He appeared solid enough, but did not seem to quite fit in with his surrounds. I suppose we must have gazed at him for a minute or so before realizing that something was not quite right, and when at last we all agreed that this man was making us feel uneasy, we scampered back over the hill and up the next just to get away from this spectre. When we'd all caught our breath back, guess what we saw at the bottom of that hill? The man and his dog were there as motionless as before and showing no sign that they must have run a good deal faster than us to get to their present position. We decided to take the safe option by heading for the recreation area and one of the side roads out of the park. I never saw the man and his dog again after that, but my brother and his friend did on at least 3 subsequent occasions, usually at the spot where we was first encountered him, and always in the morning. Some time after this event, several of my classmates came in one morning claiming they had all seen the ghost of a man walking about 9 feet in the air across the plateau the previous evening, around 9 p.m. Instead of dismissing the tale, the teacher separated the people concerned and made each one in turn retell his account of the sighting. All of the boys' accounts agreed. If you could have seen the state of them, there is no way you would have disbelieved them. We often went to the plateau and saw nothing out of the ordinary, but we often wondered if our sightings and theirs were related in some way. The years went past. I got a job and eventually married, and we now have 2 children of our own. 3. Years ago, we were visiting my mother, and on our way back home, I suggested that we stop at Frank's Park and show the kids where I used to go to school. My wife didn't fancy a walk at this point and decided to wait by the car. She works nights and was looking forward to getting home and getting a couple hours of sleep in before work, so we graciously agreed to make the walk a short one. We entered the park and turned left towards the plateau, where I related the events of years ago about the boys who had seen this figure walking in the air. We then walked back along the path past the new homes occupying the new Siemens home site, past the fire station, and back to the car which my wife was just seen getting into. We passed a few people along that path, and my wife remarked on how busy it was. I suggested that it wasn't really all that busy, as we had only seen a young couple walking their dog and a woman with 2 kids and a pushchair, to which my wife added, "What about the man with the dog?" The events of 1971 had already emerged from the back of my mind at this point, so I asked her to describe him. She said that when she got out of the car, presumably bored by waiting for our return, she saw a man wearing a black raincoat with his Labrador just standing on the path. She didn't see which way he went, but he was gone when she had returned to the car a few feet away. Either way, we would have seen him along the path we were walking or in the direction away from the car, so I suggested that she had seen the Frank's Park ghost and reminded her of my story, which I had told her several years ago before we were married. This was met with utter disbelief and perhaps annoyance, as, always the skeptic, we had recently been on holiday in Suffolk and she had experienced something odd in one of the churches we visited. I think it was in Rendlesham, and we did our usual bit by looking round the church, picking up a guidebook and leaving a couple of quid in the collection box. The churches we visit in small villages are usually deserted, and this one was no exception, but she said that the vicar must have been there because she saw him looking out of the window when we left. Minutes later, when we were on our way, I read the guidebook, which happened to mention that the ghost of a man has sometimes been seen inside the church. To this day, my wife is convinced that our 15-year-old daughter and I are winding her up about both her experiences, and she still maintains that there is no such thing as ghosts. I saw her face clearly. Platinum hair, red glasses, screaming as we crashed. But when I asked about the woman in the other car, the driver went pale. My wife died 2 weeks ago, at this exact spot. The desert doesn't just hide ghosts, it replays them. On Friday the 13th, 1978, I was traveling west on US Highway 50 through the town of Fallon, Nevada with my girlfriend. After traveling at speeds of up to 90 mph through the desert, I slowed down in the vicinity of the town and joined a group of about 4 or 5 vehicles observing the speed limit. It was morning, and the sun still hung on the mid to lower part of the eastern horizon. Up ahead, I saw a vehicle traveling east on 50 toward us. He put his left blinker on and stopped, waiting for our group of vehicles to pass before he crossed over the oncoming lane to go to wherever he wished to go to. I watched as the first of the vehicles in our group, then the second and third and so on, passed this vehicle. When the vehicle ahead of me passed the soon-to-be turning truck, tragedy struck. He turned into my lane as if I was not there, and I T-boned him at a speed of 55 mph. I looked up to see the frightened face of an elderly lady, screaming with horror as we collided. We were in a 78 Honda Accord 2-door. Theirs was, I believe, a Ford pickup. I may also have included this story in a website dealing with people who perform feats of strength, because after the vehicle came to a stop, with my injured girlfriend, screaming to me to get her out of the car, I tore off the door and laid her sobbing on the pavement. Days later, with an insurance adjuster and local sheriff, I visited the scene and was told by them that there was no way I could have opened the door as it was buckled and now was inches longer than the compressed door opening. The whole small town, it seemed, had gathered at the site of the accident, gawking at the unlucky kids from Jersey whose lives had forever changed in the twinkling of an eye. After setting Helen on the road, my eyes swept the crowd for the other vehicle, and especially the driver. When someone pointed out the man to me, I roared my outrage and went after him to do him violence, but I was restrained by some of the more level-headed townspeople. I watched as the EMT people and local police arrived and loaded my girlfriend into an ambulance. The ambulance personnel feared that Helen was hurt badly and would not let me ride with her. I was loaded onto a separate one with the driver of the pickup truck I had slammed into. I have a hot Irish temper that quickly cools, so by this time I felt ashamed for my attempt at assaulting the elderly man. Searching for words to say and noticing that he had a bandage on the bridge of his nose, I looked out of the windows to survey the accident scene for any signs of his female passenger. Finding none, I asked him, "What happened to your wife?" "Huh?" was all he could muster. "Your wife, the lady that was with you in the truck, the one I hit with my car, is she all right?" I could tell from the look of the ambulance driver that both the elderly man and the driver thought I was nuts. Fallon was a small town in '78, and I guess everyone knew everyone. When I still got no answer from the old guy, I screamed at the driver, "What happened to the woman in the truck I hit?" The elderly man looked at me and said, "There was no one in the truck with me. My wife died 2 weeks ago." I was dumbfounded. It was a week or so later that I was required to revisit the accident scene and found out that the man's wife had indeed died in an accident in another truck at almost the same site, and that the bandage on the elderly man's nose was a remnant of that one. The painkillers he was on were the reason for his impaired judgment. I described the woman I saw to a sheriff down to her eyeglasses and red-tinted platinum hair, and was told that that was what she looked like. A couple of other strange occurrences from that accident. Helen suffered not a lick of paralysis, even though she fractured 5 vertebrae. The surgeon from Washoe Medical told me again and again he had never seen anything like it. And I later met and dated a woman thousands of miles away who was at the scene of the accident as a teenager. She grew up in Fallon, and she said that some locals believe that that part of the desert Southwest is home to many paranormal activities. Our lamps awoke with phantom touches, glowing defiance as we begged them dark. Unplugged, they still hummed. What fingers linger in the wires? About few time ago, my fiancé purchased a pair of 3-way lamps. They're the type that touch and have 3 levels of brightness. Well, anyway, it was a week after we had the lamps. It was a Saturday morning and my fiancé had to go to work. We were talking for a few minutes before we had to leave. The lamps themselves were across the room from each other. I was the closest person to either one of them, about 3.5 feet away. I wasn't close enough to touch either one. Anyway, my fiancé and I were talking when we saw that both lamps had come on at the same time. We looked at each other with the same dumb look and asked each other if we saw what we saw. Well, I checked on the one across the room because it was plugged into a surge protector along with our TV, VCR and stereo. Only the lamps were affected by what happened. I just dismissed it as a small surge somewhere and forgot about it for a while, until 2 weeks ago. It was another Saturday morning. Again, we were getting ready to take my fiancé to work. I was in the bedroom getting our son changed. My fiancé was in the living room watching TV. The couch can be seen perfectly from the bedroom, so I saw that he was on the couch the whole time. The next thing I knew, my fiancé, in a slightly hysterical voice, told me the lamp across the room from him had turned itself on. I thought to myself, yeah, okay, whatever, let's just humor him. I went into the living room and, sure enough, that lamp was on. I walked over to it and turned it off. I just turned to look at my fiancée when it came back on. I started to get frustrated with the damn thing. After 2 more times of this, I finally said, "Whoever's playing with the lamp, will you please stop?" When the lamp didn't obey my bidding, my son was more than happy to turn the lamp off for me. "The hell with this," I said, and unplugged the lamp. My last thought before leaving the house was if that lamp was on when I got back home, I was leaving and not coming back. After all, it was unplugged. We left that lamp unplugged for a week. I received suggestions to have the lamp checked for shorts. To be honest, I never did have that done. It's been a week since it's been plugged back in, and we haven't had any problems since. Maybe this is a ghost story, maybe not. But I thought it was worthy enough to give everyone a smile.